Today, we will explore the intricate engineering behind medieval armor and the complex ritual of dressing a knight for war. Before continuing with the video, remember to subscribe to the channel for more documentary narratives like this one. A warrior's journey toward the battlefield does not begin with the clamor of swords or the trotting of imposing war horses, but rather in the contemplative silence and the suffocating heat of a master armorer's forge, where the very essence of protection begins to take shape. Each steel plate that composes a full medieval harness is born as a rough, dark, and imperfect surface, requiring hundreds of hours of arduous labor, methodical hammer blows, and controlled heating and cooling, until the raw metal is transformed into a true masterpiece of defensive engineering. The transition from that rustic sheet of metal to a finished piece of armor, polished to shine like a mirror and equipped with rounded edges, precise hinges, and sturdy leather straps, represents a triumph of human ingenuity over the limitations of matter. What we see in museums or historical recreations is the final result of this exhaustive process, a practical and highly sophisticated defensive structure designed not only to deflect mortal blows, but to allow the medieval soldier to move, fight, and survive in the most hostile environments imaginable. However, a full suit of armor is not a single entity, but rather an incredibly complex, three-dimensional puzzle composed of dozens of individual pieces that must interact in perfect mathematical and anatomical harmony. To truly understand how these steel plates come together to create an impenetrable fortress around the human body, it is necessary to dive into the intimate and gradual process of arming a knight, a ritual that reveals that the true strength of the armor lies as much in the invisible layers touching the skin as in the steel that reflects the sunlight. The preparation process begins long before the first piece of metal is lifted. The foundation of any quality medieval harness is not made of iron, but of fabric, sweat, and physiological adaptation. The knight initially puts on his medieval undergarments, consisting of tight hose covering the legs and a fundamental piece known as an arming doublet or arming jacket. This doublet is not a simple civilian garment, but a highly specialized piece of tactical equipment, custom sewn to fit the specific contours of that particular warrior's body perfectly. The arming jacket is thick, often padded with layers of linen, wool, or fibrous materials that serve to absorb the shock of blunt impacts that will inevitably pass through the rigidity of the steel. A peculiar and vital characteristic of the arming doublet is its relationship with the wearer's body. It absorbs the profuse sweat generated by the extreme physical effort of wearing dozens of kilograms of equipment, as well as the dirt from the environment, the dust from marches, and even fluids from the horses. Washing this jacket is a terrible risk that few knights would be willing to take, as water and drying could shrink the fabric, alter its shape, and ruin the millimeter-precise fit of the entire armor that will rest upon it. Therefore, the doublet remains unwashed, becoming a second skin darkened by use, molded perfectly to the anatomy of its owner. Over the head, before any helmet is considered, the warrior places a textile coif. This tight-fitting cap serves to keep long hair, common at the time, firmly secured and away from the face and neck. In an environment filled with rivets, metal hinges, and closure gears, a caught strand of hair could cause acute pain and fatal distraction. The coif acts as a soft barrier between the scalp and the internal lining of the helmet. With the textile foundation established, the act of putting on the armor itself begins to take shape, following a strictly logical and ascending order, arming from the feet up. The first pieces to be placed are those that cover the lower extremities, initiating an encapsulation process that will transform the man into a machine of war. The pieces that protect the lower legs, known as greaves, represent one of the greatest technical challenges for the armorer and one of the most vital protection elements for the warrior. The anatomy of the human leg, especially the calf and the shin, has a complex and conical shape that requires the metal to be modeled with three-dimensional precision. Closed greaves consist of two hinged plates that completely surround the lower leg, contouring the calf musculature and offering total coverage against the inherent dangers of the battlefield. The need for this protection is absolute and unquestionable. In a combat scenario, where spears, axes, and swords constantly seek the vulnerabilities of infantry and cavalry, a blow to the lower leg means not only pain, but the immediate loss of mobility, followed quickly by a fall and death. Therefore, the fit of the greaves must be exact. They are designed asymmetrically, distinguishing the left leg from the right, and are placed with meticulous care to ensure that the fabric of the pants or hose does not get caught or wrinkled under the metal, as any continuous friction under the weight of the steel will result in open wounds, blisters, and, most likely, lethal infections. Despite their robust appearance, original historical greaves reveal a surprising secret. The metal is often not excessively thick. The armorer's goal is not to create an impassable wall of unbearable weight, but rather a rigid and smooth surface that deflects the force of the blow, allowing the leg to maintain its natural lightness. As the defensive shell rises up the body, we find the cuisses, pieces designed to safeguard the thighs. The vocabulary of Western armor is deeply influenced by French and Italian traditions, and the words frequently adopted by other languages carry the heritage of this era of pan-European innovations. The cuisses are not mere metal cylinders, but detailed anatomical structures that feature specific design innovations, such as the stop rib. This small ridge of forged metal on the upper part of the thigh is a brilliant testament to the lethal observation of practical combat. When a spear strike hits the smooth and polished surface of the cuisse, physics dictates that the weapon's tip will tend to slide along the plate, seeking the path of least resistance. Without the stop rib, this upward slide would guide the devastating force of the impact directly toward the knight's groin and lower abdomen, areas where the armor is fragmented to allow movement and where the femoral arteries are dangerously exposed. The rib intercepts this lethal slide, absorbing the impact and trapping the weapon's tip before it can cause catastrophic damage. The interconnection between the lower pieces is guaranteed through an ingenious fastening system where the cuisse overlaps the greave, linking the two defensive structures to create a continuous line of protection that follows the flexible movement of the knee, protected in turn by the articulated polin. The true secret of the weight support of plate armor lies in the hidden fastenings. The leg harness does not hold itself up magically. It depends entirely on the arming doublet that the warrior wears beneath everything. It is at this crucial moment of preparation that the knight begins to feel the gravitational weight of war fall upon his body. The leg harness is suspended by special cords, called points, which are sewn directly into the arming doublet. All the weight of the steel covering the thighs, knees, and shins is transferred through these fabric points to the shoulders and torso of the jacket, distributing the load uniformly to avoid localized fatigue. These cords are no ordinary strings. They represent the veins of the armor. Manufactured from extremely resistant materials and heavily coated with beeswax, the points are designed to withstand extreme tension. The wax gives the cords a sticky and rough texture, ensuring that the knot, once tied, locks firmly upon itself, preventing it from coming undone with the constant vibration of a horse's trot or the savage impact of hand-to-hand combat. If, during the confusion of battle, an enemy's blade finds the gap between the plates and cuts these waxed cords, the result is instantaneous and disastrous. The heavy leg harness will collapse, the plates will slide down, locking the knee joints and transforming the knight's once fluid mobility into a paralyzing metal prison. Notably, cuisses designed for cavalry do not entirely encircle the thigh. They cover the front and the outer side of the leg, leaving the inner face, which rests against the horse's saddle, free of large, rigid metal plates. This ensures that the knight can feel the mount, apply precise commands with his legs, and prevent the steel from interfering with the equestrian equipment. This subtle distinction immediately separates armor intended exclusively for infantry from that forged for the mounted nobility. Armor, therefore, was not a standardized product in the modern sense, but extremely valuable goods that deeply reflected the social structure, economy, and hierarchy of the medieval world. A high-status harness, forged for a nobleman or a wealthy warrior, was invariably custom-made. Every curve, every angle, every millimeter of steel was calibrated to conform perfectly to the wearer's body, maximizing the efficiency of the protection. In contrast, there was munitions armor, mass-produced pieces with inferior finishing standards, distributed to line troops or less wealthy soldiers. Status and survival went hand in hand on the battlefields of Europe. Displaying richly adorned armor, with brass details and gilded edges, sent a double message to the enemy. On one hand, it announced a formidable and lethal combatant. On the other, it marked that man as a high financial value target. In the ruthless economy of medieval warfare, the death of a high-ranking opponent was often less lucrative than his capture. Shining armor signaled that beneath that steel pulsed the blood of a family capable of paying a fabulous ransom, transforming the attempt to kill into a much more careful effort to incapacitate and capture the prisoner alive. With the legs secured, the attention of the arming turns to the central zone of the body, where protection systems begin to overlap in complex layers to cover structural vulnerability points. It is here that we introduce the mail skirt. The fabric of metal rings, one of the oldest and most time-tested protection methods in the history of warfare, was not abandoned with the rise of large steel plates. On the contrary, it was intelligently adapted to fill the crucial gaps where maximum flexibility was required. The mail skirt is attached to the waist and hangs down, protecting the groin region, the hip joints, and the space between the thighs. But the function of the mail goes beyond protecting human flesh. It serves as the primary line of defense for the fragile components of the armor itself. The mail skirt descends exactly over these junction areas, creating a cut-resistant web that surrounds the suspension knots, shielding the essential ties against enemy swords. This principle of defensive layering works similarly to the arrangement of tiles on a roof, where each element overlaps and protects the fastening mechanisms of the layer below, creating a continuous barrier where the vulnerabilities of one material are compensated for by the strengths of the other. As the process reaches the upper parts of the body, the complexity of the equipment grows exponentially, marking the moment when the warrior's autonomy ends. Arming the lower half of the body can still be a viable task for a man alone, but putting on the protection for the torso and arms invariably requires the assistance of others. The squire, an essential figure, highly trained and extremely trusted, assumed the critical responsibility of ensuring that the armor was adjusted and closed impeccably. A mistake in closing a buckle could result in the knight's death, making the squire a silent guardian of his lord's life. The process of armoring the torso begins with the placement of the breastplate, the central piece that defends the heart and lungs. It is a common mistake to believe that the breastplate descends to the belt line, covering the entire abdomen. In fact, a historically accurate breastplate is designed to protect the rib cage and upper ribs, ending just below the sternum. This length limitation is not a design flaw, but a rigorous mechanical necessity to allow the warrior to bend at the waist and maintain vital flexibility in combat. The back piece, or backplate, has elegant contours that follow the curvature of the human spine, protecting the back against attacks and stray arrows. Under this shining steel, the knight would often use additional pieces of chainmail to cover the armpits and other mobile gaps. The torso armor rests on the shoulders, adding its formidable weight to the arming jacket, requiring the wearer's body to adapt to the new center of gravity. Just below the breastplate, the lower torso plate joins, known as a placard, which overlaps the lower breastplate itself. The placard rises from the waistline and fits over the breastplate, ensuring that any spear that hits the lower belly and slides upward is inevitably repelled by the downward overlap of the plates. To join these heavy steel shells, pragmatic techniques often ignored in popular representations come into play. Forged metal has an innate tension, and new or dried leather straps can be difficult to pull with finger strength alone. It is common to temporarily use thick ropes around the perimeter of the breastplate and backplate, functioning as a rudimentary tourniquet. By pulling the rope, the squire forces the steel plates to come closer and compress against the knight's body, removing pressure from the leather straps and allowing the buckles to be fastened with precision and ease. Once locked and the rope removed, the armor relaxes into its ideal state of tension, settling firmly along the lines of the body. It is at this moment that the warrior's silhouette undergoes a dramatic transformation, acquiring the imposing volume, martial posture, and terrifying presence that defined the battlefields of Renaissance Europe. Suspended from the bottom of the placard are the tassets, pieces composed of multiple horizontal lamellar plates that cover the front of the thighs and the upper groin. The tassets serve as an extra metal barrier over the mail skirt. Like the rest of the armor, these suspended plates are finely adjustable by adjustable leather straps, allowing them to be arranged vertically for foot combat, ensuring rigid coverage or repositioned with a wider lateral gap to accommodate the seat in a horse's saddle. With the core protected, the ritual proceeds to the upper extremities, focusing on the complex protection of the arms. Unlike the rigid torso, the arms require an extraordinary degree of mobility, as they are the vectors of offense and control. The arm harness is formed by multiple cannons and tubular components, joined by hinges, floating rivets, and robust leather bands, all suspended from the shoulders. The lower cannons of the vambraces cover the forearms and enclose the wrists, later complemented by long articulated metal gloves, the gauntlets. Above the forearm rests the cutter, the piece designed specifically to protect the critical elbow joint, while the rear brace protects the upper arm bone up to the shoulder. The elbow, especially the inner part of the curve, where large vital blood vessels and complex clusters of exposed tendons are located, represents a potentially lethal flaw if left without adequate protection. To mitigate this risk, the cutter has lamellar extensions and wide wings that partially wrap around the interior of the arm, ensuring that a tangential blow is blocked before hitting soft flesh. It is here that perfect symmetry in armor is abandoned in favor of maximum functionality, revealing the hyper-specialization of mounted combat tactics. The knight's body rushing against the enemy does not perform identical movements with both hands. The left arm is tasked with holding the reins of a heavy warhorse, governing the mount's trajectory, while remaining rigid, defensive, and constantly exposed to the side of the approaching opponent during a cavalry charge. In contrast, the right arm needs space and range of action to handle the heavy spear, longsword, or warhammer. For this reason, armor often reflects this operational dichotomy through a remarkable asymmetry of design. The protection of the left elbow is massive, boasting a significantly larger and more enveloping cutter than the right, as its main function is to receive and deflect the raw energy of impacts during jousts or the clash of enemy battle lines. The right elbow features a much smaller wing and leaner contours. If the right guard were too wide, it would collide with spears when brought back to the couched position, hindering the warrior's offensive movement. This pragmatic optimization extends to the large pauldrons, the imposing shoulder coverings that visually define the frightening width of a fully armored knight. The pauldron not only protects the shoulder joint, but expands its coverage area over a substantial portion of the upper breastplate, the sidearm, and the back. Made of overlapping plates that slide over one another according to the lifting of the arm, it acts as an intricate complementary upper cuirass. The left pauldron is invariably larger, often reinforced with additional layers to relentlessly protect the side of the body that engages the adversary, shielding the side of the heart. In contrast, the right piece is deeply cut away near the armpit, a deliberate sacrifice of protection in favor of a lethal advantage to comfortably accommodate the spear shaft under the arm, resting the shaft on the fixed rest of the right breastplate. This lance rest hook allows the extended base of the weapon to lock against the breastplate through a ring called a grappa, ensuring that the entire colossal mass, lightning speed, and relentless momentum of the combined charge of man, mount, and armor are channeled into a single vector directly through the sharp steel tip. The penultimate, and arguably most crucial stage of this warrior metamorphosis, involves protecting the epicenter of life and perception, the neck and head of the individual. Armor, regardless of its thickness or brilliance, is useless if the jugular veins or the cranial base are left unprotected before the opposition's gleaming blades. Often omitted in popular culture, cinema, and modern television series due to the dramatic need to show the actors' faces and emotions, gorgets, beavors, and full helmets are non-negotiable survival tools. A sensible soldier would choose to wear only a helmet over all the rest of the armor if a drastic choice were imposed, as the skull is simultaneously the most targeted, most valuable, and most susceptible target to instant annihilation. Cervical defenses include gorgets and large metal beavers designed to perfectly contour the neck and rise to cover the jaw, teeth, and the lower half of the face, totally hiding human vulnerability beneath a fixed smile of polished steel. When accommodating the helmet, such as the iconic 15th century European sallet, which extends harmoniously over the nape of the neck, the head becomes completely encapsulated in a dome of dense silence and disturbing isolation. The helmet is pushed firmly down, locking against the lower bivouac plates to ensure that no upward blow can tear the vulnerable throat. The physical and psychological reality of wearing a closed helmet is an experience of almost absolute sensory deprivation and claustrophobic disorientation. With the heavy visor lowered into combat position, the intake of vital air becomes restricted, forcing the knight to pull in panting and hot oxygen that resonates within the confined space. Hearing is terribly muffled. The deafening sound of battle, human screams, the crushing thunder of hooves, the command bugles, and the incessant clinking of iron on iron reaches the ears in a distorted way, echoing chaotically off the concave, steel walls. The field of vision, the most vital analytical tool of any fighter, is drastically reduced to a narrow and claustrophobic slit only a few millimeters wide, forcing the individual to rely blindly on exhaustive training, pure instincts, and the direction of his horse. This severe sensory limitation generated different strategic approaches depending on the regional and tactical context of European nations. In many continental armies, hermetically closed visors were mandatory to withstand the lethal cloud of projectiles and direct face blows. Interestingly, pictorial records and chronicles of the period reveal that English forces often dispensed with visors, advancing into the carnage with open-faced helmets. The true motivation often lay in the supreme tactical advantage of conscious reconnaissance, the crystal-clear ability to see the threatening flanks of the battle, to eagerly inhale fresh air, and to distinctly hear tactical commands far outweighed the imminent fear of an unlucky arrow crossing the naked face. It was a desperate gamble calculated with mastery, trading the absolute protective security of a metal box for the lethal power of uninterrupted control of the battlefield. If you felt transported to the battlefields of the 15th century and wish to continue uncovering the secrets of military history, remember to subscribe to the channel, leave your like as a true shield of support for our project, and comment on which part of this fascinating equipment of survival and death most intrigued your mind.